Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Today we're going to be talking about a slightly less known tool in the CMS toolbox, which is indexes, which essentially allows you to index your collections by specific fields and speed up queries from your code on your Wix website. So if you want to learn how to do all that and more, let's get started. So let's head into dev mode. So I'm going to do that right up over here. I'm going to turn on dev mode. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up a really basic query here inside of the onReady. So let's get rid of this boilerplate code. And the first thing I'll do over here is I'll import Wix data. That's going to be a big player today in this demonstration. And right over here, I'll go ahead and I'll run a basic query. So for example, I'll say Wix data dot query. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to have the collection that we're going to be querying. So let's go over here and find the name of that collection or the ID. So you can see here it's called mock data, and I can also just copy it right over here from copy collection ID. And I'm going to go right over here and paste that in. So there I have my collection ID. And let's start off with a query that will, for example, find everybody with the gender of male. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use a dot equal here, and I'm going to search for inside of the gender field. If you're not sure what the fields are called, we can always double check that over here. So if I open this up, we can see here the names or the IDs of all the fields that we should be using in the code. So here we have gender, and that's what I'm going to use. So let's go right back over here, and I'm going to say gender equals to male. Okay, so a pretty simple query. And then we're going to run dot find. And I'll want to store the result of this query inside of a variable. So let's go over here and say const result equals 2. And we're going to need to have await here because this is all asynchronous. And I'll just turn my onReady over here into an asynchronous function as well, just to keep everything nice and simple. So let me go ahead and format that. And another thing that I'll want to do here is to log our result. Okay, so let's see what result. Obviously, that's going to be console.log to log our result. And another thing that I'm going to want to do, because what we're doing is essentially setting a benchmark, is to log the time that it takes this to execute. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log the time right over here. So let me go ahead and say console.time. And this will start logging time essentially until we call right over here at the end console.time end. Okay, and that will end our essentially the logging of the time, and will print the time in milliseconds it took everything here in the middle to execute. Okay, so that will establish a benchmark for us in terms of the querying, and we'll also run a test. So I'll run a test in preview, and I'll also run a test on the live site just to see if there's any discrepancies there, so we can be all nice and scientific. Okay, so to get started, I've created a CMS collection, and I've populated this collection with mock data that I got from Mockaroo. And you can see here that I have several different fields, and each field has a different level of uniqueness. So for example, first name and last name are fields where we might expect to see some duplicates, but probably not many. Email would be a field that's supposed to be completely unique. Gender, we can expect quite a few duplicates, even though we have several different kind of genders here. And for age, we can also assume maybe a medium amount of duplicates because we have 10,000 items here in this collection. And the ages range from 1 to 100, so we can expect quite a few duplicates, but maybe not so many as the gender. Okay, so there's different types of data points here. And before we actually start talking about indexes at all, I would like to first create a benchmark by running some simple queries on this collection so we can measure the speed at which those queries execute. Okay, so let's head into preview mode. I'm going to do that right over here. And as soon as preview mode loads, we can see here in the developer console that we got back our query, and it seemed to happen pretty much instantaneously. Um, and I don't see the logs that are supposed to log the time, but that kind of makes sense because sometimes we don't see things inside of the Wix developer console in preview mode that we can see on the live site in the browser. So we're definitely going to want to take a look at the browser. Another thing that I'm thinking here is that in order to make this like a little more scientific, it might be better to run our function, let's say at the click of a button. Because Wix does some um, rendering of the pages on the server side before it actually serves them. So if our query is built into the onReady in the way that I built it, it's possible that Wix is already kind of fetching that data as the page is loading, which would give us like a inaccurate estimate as to how long that query is actually taking. So let's go ahead and do that slight refactoring and then also check what the performance is like on the live site. Okay, so here I am back in the editor, and I've added in this button with the label query. And what I'll do is I'll go over here and I'll just change the name of the button. Let's call it query button. And now what we can do is over here inside of our onReady, I'm going to add in an event listener for that button. So $W, and I'll go ahead and select our query button, and I'll add the .onClick. And when we run this onClick, essentially we'll run the function that actually does the query. So I'll separate that out here into a separate function. So let's say async function, and I'll just call this run query. And I'm just going to copy the code that we already wrote right into this function over here. Awesome. And then last thing I need to do is just actually call that function here inside of the onClick, do a little cleanup, and we're ready to test again. So I'm going to publish the site and see what this looks like on our live site. Okay, so here I am on the live site, and I have my console open here on the side. And as you can see now, the query didn't run automatically because now it'll only hopefully run when we click the button. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this query button, and it still came back pretty quickly, so that's quite impressive. And we see we got back 50 items, and it took 239 milliseconds. And I can actually keep on doing this so we can just double check that it's always pretty much the same. Yeah, so this is our benchmark, 239, 233. That's kind of like in the middle of the ones that we got. So let's just say 233. And I'm going to copy over that benchmark and head back into the editor. And let's just make a note right over here. So I'll make a note here that let's say um, equals, I'll copy actually this right over here. So this is the query that we ran. And the time that it took was 233 ms. Okay, that will just keep a log that way of what we got. So let's try now one of the other fields. So let's try, for example, the age. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go just double check the name of the field. So that's age. Okay, so let's go over here and change this to age. And let's look for an age of, let's say, 23. Okay, and my prediction here, I hope I hope I don't make a fool of myself, but my prediction here is that this query would be slightly slower, and that's because it's more likely that we'll have to look through more of the collection to find the people whose age is equal to 23 than the people whose gender is male. Because think that we might have only looked through, let's say, the first, I don't know, 200 items to find 50 males, but to find 50 people who are 23, I think will be a lot more challenging statistically. So then the query would probably take a little longer. That's my prediction. But let's go ahead and see if that's actually true. So I'm going to go ahead and publish this, and then we'll head over to the live site to see what this query returns. Okay, so here we are back on the live site, and I've refreshed just to make sure that we're looking at the most recent published version of our site. And let's go ahead and try out our new query. So I'm going to hit query, and we see here that it didn't take very long, but as I predicted, it took a little longer. So it took 280 in order to find 50 results over here. And if I run it again, let's just make sure that this is, yeah, so you can see here it's taking 280, 275. Yeah, so let's just go with 280. I think that's like a fair estimate. So let me head back over to the editor and let's just make a log over here of this result of our experiment. So this was the query that we did. And this took 280 milliseconds. Okay. And now let's go ahead and try something that there should be even less of. So let's try, for example, a name. So in order to find a name, I'm going to have to just go into my database and open it up. And let's find one of the names here in the collection. I'm guessing here that there are names that repeat, even though I'm not 100% sure. But let's take the name, for example, Liam, one of the names up here up top, and go back into our code. And this was first name, so we'll be searching here by first name, and it will be Liam. And note here that when we're searching with an equal um, filter, that it needs to be case sensitive. Okay, so we can't search for Liam here because then we won't find anything. It has to be capital Liam, and this has to do a bit with the fields, the filters that index actually supports. And I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So here we have first name Liam, and let's go ahead and test this. I'm not so sure how to, in terms of prediction, how this is going to come out. I mean, I have thoughts going both ways. So I'm just going to publish the site, head over to the live site, and see the results together with you. Okay, so back on the live site, refreshed again, and let's go ahead and hit that query. And this one took 245, so a little less. Let's go ahead and try that again. 236 and 224. And we got 4 results. So I'm trying to think of what the logic is here exactly. Um, I mean, maybe because there are less, it took less time, but I would think that that meant that it had to search through the entire collection in order to identify that. So I'm not sure exactly logically how this correlates. If you have any ideas, let me know below, but let's still record this. So let 245, and I'll head back into the editor, and let's record this one, 245. 245. Okay, and I was thinking originally of doing one more test, let's say for email, where we're expecting there to be only one unique entry for each, for that field. But to be honest, I mean, coming up with a result of 4 um, and 1, I feel like that probably wouldn't make a huge difference if there's only one unique one, or if there were 4 unique ones. I feel like that's similar enough. So I'm not going to test that last one. I think that these give us a few good benchmarks for different fields and their kind of different frequencies of data or data types. So if we expect to have the same items for the same field. And I think we're ready to head over and start talking about indexes and see how they actually improve the performance of our query. So before I talk about what the index actually is, let's talk about how we'd actually add that index. So we have a little context for the philosophy of it. So if I go over here to more actions, I'm inside my CMS collection, and here you can see indexes. Okay, and it's important to note, first note is that indexes are only available on premium sites. Okay, so if you haven't upgraded your website to premium, then you might not have access to these indexes. To be honest, I did think that I saw them on on free sites as well, but in the documentation it says that it's a premium feature, so you're only guaranteed to have it on a premium website. So let me go ahead and click indexes, and I'm going to go up here. You can add a new index. And once you go to add a new index, you have the option to add a regular index or a unique index. And a regular index is relevant for fields like we had with name, like we had with gender, with age, where we're expecting there to be more than one item in the collection that matches a certain value of that field. So since we expect multiple males, multiple females, since we expect multiple people that are age 23, 25, so for that we would want to use a regular index. And not only does that mean that there's multiple items possibly for each value, but because of that, it also means that we can combine different fields together to create more complex indexes. As opposed to unique, where it essentially means that we're going to be choosing a field to run the index on that it should be unique to the collection. So for example, in our collection, the email field should be unique to each item because there shouldn't be two people with the same email. And this can also help you prevent people or prevent yourself from accidentally adding data to the collection that shouldn't be, because the index won't let you add an item to the collection if its value for that indexed field matches another item in the collection because it's meant to be unique. Okay, so that is a little bit about regular and unique, and you can read more about this, of course, in the documentation. We're going to have to choose an index name, and we're going to have to choose the field. So if I switch this here, for example, to unique, then you can see on the bottom that it's only giving me the option for one field. I'm not going to talk so much about the unique indexes because I think it's a little boring. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's actually something that you kind of already have built into your Wix collections, because each Wix collection already has an ID field that is unique, and it's already indexed by that field. So this is something that you could kind of experience already if you try to run a few queries, let's say by ID, then you could experience the same quality of querying that you could experience with this unique index. This is really only if you want to have another field in addition to the Wix ID, which is also something that you'd want to query by, which is definitely possible. I just don't think it's necessary to demonstrate it right now. So we're going to be focusing on the regular. And let me call this, so let's start off simple. I'm going to create an index just for one of the fields that we tested on before. So let's try out the age field, because that was the one that took us the longest. So I think that that would give us the best contrast, most likely, of if this index is doing anything and to what extent it's doing something. So let's call this index the age index. And for fields, I'm going to choose right over here, I'm going to choose the age field. Okay. And in terms of sort, so I can choose if it's going to sort ascending or descending. So ascending would be, if I'm not mistaken, I always confuse the two. So if it's not what I say, then it's the opposite. Ascending would be, it would start, the first items that would come out would be the lowest ones in terms of a number, let's say. If it was A to Z, it would be like AB. And then later on, we'd have higher numbers or Z. And then descending would be the opposite. Okay, so that's in terms of sort. I'm not even sure if a sort is required here. I could, if you want to play around at home, you can try clicking the save button without the sort, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume that it's required. And you can see here that I could add additional fields, and we're going to play around with that in a moment. But let's go ahead and save. And this index might take some time to generate. You can see here I'm kind of getting this loading indicator. So let's give it a moment and see if we get some kind of like check mark or something like that that tells us, okay, your index is ready, because I wouldn't want to assume that it's indexed before I saw something like that. This is, by the way, a great opportunity to go ahead and like the video, to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this and you want to see more of content like this every single week. And leave a comment if you have any question about indexes, if you have questions about Wix data, Wix, Velo, coding, web dev, etc. And I see it's taking some time, so I'm going to pause and I'll be back in a moment once it's done. Okay. So my index has completed because the loader is gone and I see this option here to delete the index. Note that the max that you can have for each collection is 3. I think it said it several times there while we were setting up the index, but just in case you missed it, we can have up to 3 of these per collection. But I'm going to start off just with this one. And since we already have a benchmark from it, let's go ahead and now test querying our collection by age. So I'm going to go and close this and close this. And here we are in our code. And I'm just going to change our query function back to query the age field. And let's query the same exact age that we were querying before. So that was 23. And let's see how this query now compares. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to publish this change, head over to the live site, and we'll click on that query button a few times and see what happens. Okay, so here we are on the live site and we're ready to test this out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit query now. And okay, so it went a little faster. Okay, so it was 224 instead of, what did we have before? 280. Let me just try that again. Yeah, so again, 211, even faster. 220. That one took a really long time for some reason. Um, Let me try again. Okay, 213, 202. Okay, so definitely based on my very scientific experiments, we do see some improvement here. So with the index, we got 202 milliseconds. Let me just go update that over here. So let's say for age, we got 202 milliseconds. Okay, so that's definitely an improvement over there. We can go ahead and try one of the other ones. So for example, I'm going to go ahead, I'll set up an index for gender so we can test that as well. Okay, so I've gone ahead, I've set up another index here for gender. So let's go ahead here and just make the adjustments to the code. So we'll be searching for a gender again, and let's also search again for male just to be consistent with what we tested before. So let me go ahead and now publish this and we'll head to the live site. Okay, so here we are back on the live site and let's go ahead and hit that query button. And I see here that it's not a huge difference. So if I go ahead and I query 218, 223, yeah, and just let's make sure that it's actually querying the right thing. So let's make sure we have a bunch of males here. Whoa, let's see. Yeah, male, male, yeah, so that's the right query. And yeah, so it doesn't seem to be a huge improvement, maybe a slight improvement, like a few milliseconds. Let's see, 208 versus what we had over here, which was 233. So yeah, let's say that the best one here was, let's say, 208. Um, yeah, so it seems like there's less of an improvement for the more frequent values. So for gender, where we have like a lot of male values in the field, the difference between the the unindexed query and the index query doesn't seem to be as large as for fields where it's a little more sparse. Okay, so that is my preliminary conclusion here. If I'm not mistaken, that also correlates with what Wix has said in the documentation as well. There's one more thing that we're going to experiment with, and that is when we have intersecting fields. So at the moment, what we've been doing is we've been running a query just for one, with a filter for one field at a time. And something that the index allows us to do is to potentially speed up an index by a specific query that includes several fields. So that's the next thing I want to try and see if that really does see like what the benchmark there would compare with the indexed fields there. So that's the next thing that we're going to try out. But before that, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about what this indexing is actually doing and how it works. So how is this indexing magic actually working? So let's take, for example, the gender field. And we were doing a query for male. So that means that you can think that the server that's running the query, the database is essentially going line and checking, does does the value of the gender field equal male? Yes. Okay, return it. Yes, return it. Yes, return it. No, it's out. Yes, yes, no, no, etc. Okay, so that's essentially what it's doing, which means that it has to search through items that it doesn't know if it's male or female or what it is, and it has to go essentially item, item. When we have an index, essentially what we're doing is we're pre-grouping the specific fields by values. So essentially we're taking all the males and we're putting them together on one page and we're saying, okay, all the males are right over here. So now I know that if I am querying for the value male, instead of searching each line and seeing, okay, is the value male, is the value male, I can actually go to the index, to the page where it has all of the males, and I know that all the males are there, so I just grab the first 50 and we're done. Okay, so that's kind of like an abstraction of how it's actually speeding up. Um, you might be thinking, okay, so what does that mean if we have like a unique index? So like, how does it help to put each item on an individual page? And that is a slightly more complex thing to explain. So I'm not going to attempt to do it. But essentially, the basic concept is that since we are providing more direct and knowledgeable access to the querying engine about where things are, it's able to find them quicker. Let's put it that way. So that's a little bit about how the indexes works behind the scenes, but you don't have to know how it works for it to work. You just need to know how to use it. And that's what we're going to be demonstrating here. And we have been demonstrating here. So let's hop in and as a final kind of experiment, let's take a look at how a query with multiple fields compares to an indexed query with multiple fields. Okay, so here I am back on our page code. And first, let's set up a query that will, let's say, do a cross between gender and age. Okay, so for example, here we have gender male. So I'm going to add here in addition dot equals, and let's have age 23. Okay, so we're going to cross-reference between gender and age, which I think is going to take a little more time in terms of querying. It's also a good chance to point out here that I've only been using equals here, and that's because the indexing only is supported by specific filters. So that's equals, has some, greater than, I think. You can take a look at the documentation and it has a list there, but for example, it doesn't have contains. So it means you can't search like a block of text in a field that and say, okay, does it contain, let's say, can or something like that. So it only really works with some of the fields. You can still, of course, obviously query your collection for the non-indexed or the non-supported with using the non-supported filters, but it won't actually kick your index into gear. So you'll get kind of the regular query speed and not the hyper fast query speed that we saw before with the index. So let's go ahead and test out this change. I'm going to publish and we'll see if this is a slower query or not, and then we can compare it to our actual indexed query. Okay, so back on the live site, let me go ahead and hit that query button. And okay, this one took 199, so that's even quicker. Let's see, 205, 201, 202. Okay, so it's looking like we're around in like the 200 range, let's say 201. So let's go ahead and record that. So we have this kind of double query here. And I'll move this to the same line. And this was 202 milliseconds over there. Okay, so that's what we got over here. For also, yeah, also male and also age. It's interesting that this was even quicker. I wonder possibly if it's related to the fact that we already set up a if that we already set up the index here for age. So I'm not sure if that affects it, even if it's only a partial search. It's very possible. So to eliminate the possibility of that, let's go ahead and not use age, but instead we'll use, let's use first name. Okay, so I'll do first name Liam and gender male, even though it's quite likely that we'll have an overlap there anyways, because I mean, to me, I don't know. I hope that if there are any non-male Liams out there, I apologize, but if I'm not mistaken, Liam tends to be a male name. So what I'll do instead is I'll go ahead and I'll delete our previous indexes. So I'll delete our gender index and our age index. And then we'll run that experiment one more time because I'm curious to see if, even though we didn't index for both of those fields together, just having an index on one of those fields, or actually we have on both of those fields separately, sped up our query, and we'll check that out. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've deleted both of our previous indexes, and we're still querying for the cross between gender male and age 23. So let me go ahead and hit query here and see. Yeah, okay, so it's a little longer. So that is interesting. Let me try again here. Timer default already exists. Oh wow, this query must be taking a long time. Wow, that query took a very long time for some reason. Let me try again here. Okay, now my queries are like taking. Okay, there we go. Now we got 274. Um, wow. Okay, so suddenly the queries got very long. Again, this just goes to demonstrate that there are a lot of different factors that go into, how quickly the query may be happening. Your internet speed and just the Wix servers, your website. I mean, there's 1,000 things going on here. Let me try one more time. Okay, so now we're back. I guess I just had like a slight slowdown, but I do see that it's taking a little longer than our first benchmark. Another thing that's important to note here is that Wix possibly is caching these queries. So that means like after I ran this first query right over here, essentially Wix remembers that this result here of 41 items that we got back is essentially what we should be returning for an identical query that comes through. So since I'm kind of querying again and again and again the same thing, it makes sense that it's kind of speeding up almost as we query. So I'm going to take the higher end here, the first query, as the benchmark before we started getting these crazy long amounts. So 269, let's say, let's make that our new benchmark over here. So instead of 202, we'll have here 269. And now what I'll do is I'll set up an index for that intersection. So it's interesting because we got actually 3 experiments and I'm only intended to do 2 experiments out of 1. So essentially we had no index at all I'm talking about 2 fields together. So we have no index at all. We had individual index for each one. And now let's see what happens when we have an index that indexes both of those fields together. So I'm going to go over here back to open up our collection. And we're going to set up a new index. So I'm going to go over here to indexes. And I'm going to add an index. And this will be our age gender index. And I'll choose the field. So let's choose gender. Okay, and we can sort here ascending. And I'll add another field of age. And we'll sort also as ascending. So then let's go ahead and save that index. And again, this will take some time to create, so I'll be back in a moment once that's done. Okay, so here we are back on the live site after setting up the index, and we're running the same query that we were running before. So gender male, age 23. And let's go ahead and hit that query button. And we got 206, 195, that's pretty good, 202, 209, 193. So there definitely is some kind of speed up here. So 206, yeah, and the previous we had like 269 for the first query. It is still maybe not as fast as the 202 that we got. So I don't see like a huge difference between setting up the index to include the two fields together, as opposed to setting up each one individually. It is important to note here, kind of as we wrap up though, that in the queries that I was running, so we were only getting back up to 50 items because that's the default. But if I had expanded the limit maybe to 100, 200, 1,000 even, I imagine that would slow the queries down somewhat, and the query times would be longer, and also the effects and the difference that we would see between the index and the query might be longer. So I was really testing here like the most basic situation, which is not so slow to begin with like a regular query. But I think that kind of just to wrap everything up here, I mean, it is evident that the index did speed up the query somewhat. I think we can conclude that. And I mean, not that I thought that Wix was lying or anything like that, or that indexes don't work, but it's nice to see something with your own eyes and see how it works. So we also kind of got a proof of concept here, but also learned about how to actually set up those indexes and how they're working behind the scenes a little bit. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or if you think I got anything wrong, I'd love to hear, because this is an area which I know somewhat about, but I think there's still a lot more to learn in. So I'm curious to hear if you like are an expert in building databases and you have some insights into how indexes work and such, and yeah, you'd want to share that. So I'd love to hear that in the comments. And if you want to see more videos like this, tutorials about Wix, Velo, coding, web dev, etc., please subscribe to the channel so I can see you next time.